Folks, are buyers once again lining up to overpay? I'll talk about that and then get into the latest home prices and insights for York Region for week ending January 31st, 2024. If you come back here every week and you enjoy the content, consider subscribing and hit the bell button. And we love your comments. Comment below. Okay, so I announced a few weeks ago, early on in January, how it's getting busy out there. There are buyers showing up. Open houses are full. It's tough sometimes to book a showing time because the slots are all filled for showing times. And that's what was happening. That's what we're seeing. And we're still seeing it now. It feels, from my experience of working with sellers and buyers, it feels like it's starting to calm down a little bit, but it might be a little premature to say that. However, I do want to report on, now that we've been at this for a whole month in the new year, what offer nights are like today versus way back when we were at peak offer night and buyers were lining up to overpay and there was chaos in the streets of Toronto and the GTA, because it is different. So when I talk about, look, it's busy out there, buyers are competing, and sellers, there's a lot more properties these days being listed with an offer night versus what's happening the last 6 to 8 months. And a lot of people are taking that as, oh man, it's nuts again, and there's chaos out there. Let me kind of explain what's happening right now versus before. Before, when it was offer night and it was a little bit nuts out there, properties were being sold. It was commonplace for buyers to pay $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 over asking. That was commonplace. It was happening often, and sometimes a bit more than that. So imagine, is offer night, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 over asking was happening a lot, peak 2022. So here we are, 2024, and I'm saying there's a lot more properties now being listed with offer night. And a lot of people calling me are saying, oh man, is it like that again? Not really. So there's still offer nights, and a lot of sellers are choosing to list with a strategy of, let me list it a bit low, let me attract the buyers, and I'm going to sell for over asking. That's the idea. Well, let me tell you how that's working out. I have data here just for Vaughan, so we're keeping it really simple, concise, for Vaughan, for freehold. So I'm including detached, semi-detached, and townhouses, freehold properties only, for properties that were listed in January and had an offer date in January. So there was 19 of those listed in January and had an offer date in January. Some of those, as always, don't end up selling. Sometimes the seller didn't feel they got what they expected. Could be that the seller is right. Maybe they should have got a bit more and they relist, and some of them will have a successful sale later. Sometimes the buyers come in too low. Sometimes the seller's expectations are too high. We're not analyzing that right now, but we're looking at 19 of these properties in Vaughan, freehold, just for the month of January, were listed with an offer date. Most of them sold. But let me give you some of these numbers. One property was listed at $2.199 million. One property was listed at $1,988,000. These are all with offer dates. But the rest, 17 out of those 19 properties, were listed between 1,488, or 1,498, so just under 1.5 to as low as 788. So between 800 and 1.5 million is the vast majority of those listings. So understand that that is the most competitive price point. On the low end, it's very much an entry-level type property. A lot of first-time home buyers are competing around the million mark. And then for some of those in the 1.4, 1.5, some of those are second-time buyers where they're selling their condo or their townhouse and they're trying to move up to an entry-level type detached property. A very, very competitive price point. You also have people downsizing from their $2.5 million or more property to something a lot more affordable, a lot cheaper. So that's a very competitive price point, and that's when we're getting most of the buyers competing. So understand that it's not every property that's being listed that way. So what are these selling at? Well, there's many selling at 100,000 over, 50,000 over, 150,000 over. We're not seeing, it's very rare, 300, 400, 500, 600,000 over. But I have a few examples right here. One was listed at 1,398, sold for 1.4. So $2,000 over asking. Another one here listed at 1,489, sold for 1,505. So it sold for 16,000 over asking. Another one here, and this is the most expensive one, listed at 2,199 with an offer date, sold for 2,100. So basically 100,000 below their list price. Some of these sales were sold with condition on financing, for example, which was unheard of before when we had the crazy peak times with offer dates. It was unheard of to actually sell or buy with an offer date, with a condition. But we're seeing that, not a lot. There's not a lot of these that have sold with conditions, but we are seeing it. But we are, the biggest point I want you to take away from this, it's different than before. We're not getting the massive amounts of dollars over the list price. Some of them are selling very close to the list price. And I'm saying this because, you know, I have buyer clients and they see that it's an offer night and like, oh, how much more is it going to be? Well, this is where the realtor that's representing the buyer really needs to do their homework and analyze what's this home expected to sell at. Now, you can't predict, you know, what if some buyer's prepared to go 300,000 or 400,000 over asking. You can only kind of basically base it on what makes sense with the current market. And then you take your shot if you're a buyer. But also agents with the listings. Some of the sellers need to understand and really know what the expectation is. Because I can guarantee you some of these sellers that listed, like this one here, listed at 1,398, sold for 1.4. I can tell you that that probably was not the expectation. They probably expected a lot more. They didn't get it, and they chose to accept 1.4. Whereas some sellers would have said, no, I expected much more, and they will just relist at the higher price. So it all depends what makes sense, what doesn't. It all depends on who you're working with as your realtor to really manage those expectations and what makes sense. If you're a buyer, just because there's an offer date does not mean it's going to be way out of the stratosphere, the price. It could still be very manageable. And if you're a seller, just because you list with an offer date strategy, it's not showing right now that sellers are getting way over asking. You still need to understand and manage your expectations as to what makes sense and what doesn't. Peak last time for properties sold this week, next week, a week later, properties are selling for 50,000, 100,000 more. That's not happening this time. Although buyers are still competing. They're just not right now paying way more than the list price. If you think this video can help somebody you know, please pass it along. If you get value from what we're talking about, subscribe. And if you want to speak with me about your real estate situation, selling, buying, it's really simple. Up here, there's a link to my calendar. Below this video in the description, there's a link to my calendar. Click on that, book a time that's convenient for you, and we'll talk about whatever's on your mind. Now, let's get into the numbers. One other note on those 19 properties that we're talking about that were listed in January and had an offer date for January, 7 of those, so a high percentage, 7 of those were purchased less than, well, 3 years or less. So they're fairly recent purchase and they're being sold right away. Let's get into the numbers here. Here's a quick summary. Average sold prices for detached properties only. At the bottom, we had Richmond Hill. So Richmond Hill went from number 1 to number 3. In the middle is Vaughan, and then Markham. Markham went from number 3 to number 1. It's amazing how they're just all jockeying for a position there. However, Richmond Hill prices came down, Vaughan prices came down, Markham prices went up, and I'm just looking at the previous week. Let's take a closer look here. So here's Vaughan. Again, detached properties for week ending January 31st. 31 detached properties were sold. 5 of those were at $2 million or more. Sales are trending up. We expect that. It's what we expect this time every single year. As we get closer to spring, sales do continue to grow. Average sold price, for a little while we were talking about average sold price is trending up. Now for a couple of weeks, average sold price has been coming down. It's now sitting at $1,669,000. 1,669 is 14% lower than where we were this time last year. For a few weeks into the new year, average sold prices were pretty much where we were this time a year ago, but this 1 week dropped down. This time last year, average sold price went up. There's a 14% difference. Median price, 12% lower than where we were this time a year ago. 31 were sold, lots of them, 42% sold. Well, lots of them, not lots of them, but a high percentage. 42% sold at list price or more. Listings, well, active listings is dropping, so there's fewer properties available for sale. So sales are going up, fewer properties are available for sale. We would expect a lot more listings at this time, especially if sellers are kind of seeing what's going on with prices these days and the way buyers are kind of back out there looking for properties. But listings went way down. And this is just for detached properties. Listings dropped. I put a question mark wondering, where are all the sellers? What's happening? Months of inventory, way down. We're sitting at 1.2 months of inventory. So normally, as months of inventory drop, we would expect prices to go up, but that's not what's happening here right now. I can't explain why prices are not going up when months of inventory is this low. Over the next few weeks, I'm sure it'll become apparent as to the direction or the trend that we're going on. Here's Richmond Hill. Only 7 detached properties were sold. We do expect sales to go up. Not in Richmond Hill. Sales dropped down to 7. 1 property sold at $2 million or more, bringing the average sold price all the way down to $1,544,000. 7, even 14 and 12, with the sales we did the previous week, they're not big enough numbers to really get a true sampling of what the average number should be or the average sales figure. But the way it is, $1,544,000 is 17% lower than where we were this time a year ago. The median of 1,335 is 21% lower than where we were this time a year ago. 7 were sold, not a lot. It's way less than what we were selling this time a year ago. Listings are on the increase still, not a ton. Active listings is just slightly trending downwards. Months of inventory is way up there right now at 5.5 months of inventory. It was coming down and now it's shot up. It's taken into account if we're only selling 7 a week or only buying 7 a week, we got lots of inventory. Almost half a year of inventory. Here's Markham. 24 detached properties were sold. 7 of those were at $2 million or more, which is a big increase over the last few weeks. Average sold price spiked up to $1,820,000. 1,820 is 8% higher than where we were this time a year ago. The median price of 1,695, that's 2% higher than what we were this time a year ago. 24 were sold. Half of those 12, sold at list price or more. And 31 were listed. And again, I'm wondering, where are the sellers? How come we're not seeing more and more listings out there? And months of inventory down to 1.3. Now this is really what we would expect. As months of inventory come down, and remember, months of inventory is the relationship between supply and demand. 1.3, it's down, that's slow. It's pretty much a seller's market when we're talking about 1.3 months of inventory. Months of inventory comes down, we expect average price to go up. Here, a few weeks earlier, months of inventory was increasing, prices were decreasing. Now it's down, so prices are up. That's the normal way things should happen. As you saw in Richmond Hill, the market doesn't always follow what we say is a normal situation. Here's a quick summary. Look, in most cases, we are sitting in a seller's market. I know many people out there don't want to hear that. If you're a buyer, if you're a seller, you're excited about that news. It all depends on what side of the transaction you're on. We do have a bit of shortage. There are more and more properties being sold with an offer date strategy. And that's just because of the confidence that buyers are actually going to show up and bid. Who you hire matters. Be careful how you do that strategy. And thanks for watching. Have a great day.